Well, this is definitely not first-class behavior. The officer's voice cut through the crowded airport terminal, sharp enough to draw attention before anyone even understood what was happening. Officer Daniel Reynolds tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk forming, as he looked the black woman up and down, slow, deliberate, dismissive. "That designer carry-on doesn't change who you are," he added loud enough for nearby travelers to hear. A few people chuckled awkwardly. Others turned to look. The woman stood still in her tailored gray blazer, her posture calm, her expression controlled. Reynolds stepped closer, deliberately invading her space. "You people always think a nice outfit is enough to fool security?" he continued, shaking his head, as if disappointed by something predictable. Without waiting for her response, he reached for her wrist. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed louder than expected. Someone whispered, "I knew something wasn't right." Another voice muttered, probably stolen identity. A phone camera lifted. Then another. Reynolds leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening. "Let's see how confident you are without the attitude." As he pulled her hands behind her back, her wallet slipped from her grip. A metallic badge slid across the polished floor. One TSA supervisor froze mid-step, his eyes locked on the emblem. And suddenly, nobody laughed anymore. If you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, comment your city and local time below. Stay with this story until the end, because sometimes the person being judged is the last person anyone expected. Dr. Aaliyah Carter had learned long ago that composure was a form of armor. At 34, she had spent more than a decade navigating rooms where she was often underestimated before she even spoke a word. Boardrooms, federal task force briefings, secure conference facilities where decisions influenced the safety of millions of travelers moving through the invisible arteries of the nation every single day. She had grown accustomed to the pauses that followed her introductions, the subtle surprise, the occasional doubt hidden behind polite smiles. And yet none of those reactions had ever changed the precision of her work. That Monday morning began like dozens before its structured, efficient quiet. At 5:40 a.m., the alarm on her phone vibrated softly across the walnut nightstand of her downtown Chicago apartment. No loud ringtone, no chaotic rush, just a gentle signal that the day had begun. Aaliyah sat up, taking a slow breath, as pale winter light filtered between the clean lines of the city skyline outside her window. Chicago, in early spring, still carried a trace of cold in the air, the kind that sharpened focus rather than dulled it. She stretched once deliberately, mentally reviewing the day ahead. Flight UA 217 to Washington, D.C. Departure. 8:15 a.m. Meeting with the Department of Homeland Security Review Board scheduled for 11:30 a.m. Presentation length 22 minutes. Subject matter procedural vulnerabilities identified across 3 major airport screening hubs. She already knew her material without notes. Every statistic, every timestamp, every operational detail. Because unlike many consultants who simply analyzed systems, Aaliyah had spent years inside them. Her credentials had never been accidental. She graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown University's School of Security Studies, later earning her doctorate in risk analysis and transportation infrastructure security. Her dissertation, a 214-page evaluation of biometric screening weaknesses in high-volume transit hubs, was still cited in internal DHS white papers. At 29, she became the youngest advisor assigned to a multi-agency aviation fraud task force that uncovered a passport replication scheme spanning 4 countries and an estimated $18 million in fraudulent travel documents. She did not talk about that case often, but the agencies she worked with remembered. Precision, discretion, reliability. 3 qualities repeatedly noted in performance evaluations rarely seen outside classified channels. At 6:30 a.m., Aaliyah stood in front of her closet selecting her outfit with the same practical intention she applied to every professional decision. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to attract attention. A tailored charcoal blazer, an ivory silk blouse, dark-fitted trousers, low-heeled black leather shoes designed for long terminals and longer days, minimal jewelry, small stud earrings, her natural shoulder-length curls parted neatly at the center, professional, neutral, efficient, clothing that allowed her to move through public spaces without interruption, or so she preferred to believe. By 7:05 a.m., her car service arrived downstairs. The driver greeted her politely, already familiar with the quiet routine of early weekday airport trips. Chicago's morning traffic was steady but manageable, the city gradually waking as pale sunlight reflected across the glass surfaces of office towers. She reviewed her digital briefing folder during the drive, scanning final notes regarding inconsistencies flagged in random secondary screening patterns observed across 3 airports. Patterns most passengers would never notice. Patterns most agencies would prefer not to acknowledge too quickly. Patterns that suggested unconscious bias influencing operational decisions. Her report did not accuse individuals. It identified systems. Because systems, unlike individuals, could be redesigned. At exactly 7:32 a.m., the black sedan pulled into the departures drop-off lane at O'Hare International Airport. The familiar choreography unfolded instantly, rolling suitcases crossing paths, flight announcements echoing across high ceilings, coffee cups in hurried hands, travelers moving with purpose, anxiety, anticipation. Airports were ecosystems of compressed emotion, excitement, stress, hope, fear, reunions, departures, and beneath all of it, an invisible architecture of security protocols designed to keep everything functioning without incident. Aaliyah stepped from the vehicle, adjusting the strap of her structured leather carry-on, a compact, graphite-colored case containing her laptop encrypted flash drive presentation notes and a slim folder of identification documents she rarely needed to show. Her government credentials remained secured inside a discreet compartment of her wallet. Not hidden, simply not displayed unnecessarily. She preferred her work to speak before her titles did. Inside the terminal, the morning rush had begun to intensify. The soft murmur of thousands of conversations blended with rolling suitcase wheels and overhead announcements calling passengers to gates across the country. Aaliyah moved calmly through the check-in area, her pace steady but unhurried. Confidence often appeared indistinguishable from routine. She passed digital display boards listing departures to New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, Seattle. Her flight remained on time. Gate B12, boarding scheduled in 45 minutes. Plenty of time. She approached the TSA pre-check entrance, where shorter lines allowed frequent travelers to proceed with minimal delay. A business traveler in front of her glanced briefly in her direction before returning to his phone. A family behind her quietly negotiated carry-on space for a child's oversized backpack. Normal airport life unfolding in predictable rhythm. Yet several yards away, leaning casually near a structural column, Officer Daniel Reynolds observed the flow of passengers with a practiced but increasingly restless gaze. 20 years in airport policing had shaped his instincts, some accurate, others shaped by repetition and assumption. He noticed details most travelers overlooked. Body language, eye movement, travel patterns, ticket classes, behavioral inconsistencies. At least that was how he justified the conclusions he often reached too quickly. From his position near the security queue, Reynolds' attention paused. Not dramatically, just long enough. Aaliyah's calm posture, her business-class boarding pass visible briefly in her hand, her composed demeanor, her solitary travel. Something about the combination triggered a quiet alert in the back of his mind. Not evidence, not cause, just suspicion searching for justification. He watched as she placed her identification back into her wallet, the movement smooth, practiced. Her carry-on appeared high quality but understated, her clothing professional but not extravagant. Nothing obviously unusual. Yet Reynolds continued observing. Patterns formed quickly in minds trained to find them, sometimes too quickly. A man standing near Reynolds muttered something quietly, barely audible, above the ambient terminal noise. Reynolds did not respond immediately, but the comment lingered long enough to influence the direction of his attention. Across the polished floor, Aaliyah stepped forward as the TSA line advanced, unaware that within minutes, routine would give way to confrontation. Unaware that her quiet morning would become a moment witnessed by dozens. Unaware that someone nearby had already begun forming a conclusion about her story before she ever had the opportunity to speak. Because sometimes the most consequential conflicts begin not with evidence, but with assumption. And Officer Reynolds was already moving closer. Officer Daniel Reynolds had built his career on believing that instinct was just another word for experience. 22 years in airport policing had convinced him that patterns rarely lied. Or at least that was the story he told himself whenever his conclusions felt easier than asking more questions. He had started as a patrol officer in a small Illinois suburb where most of his early work involved noise complaints, minor theft reports, and the occasional domestic dispute. Back then, the job had seemed straightforward. Facts were facts. Evidence was evidence. But airports were different. Airports moved faster than certainty. They demanded decisions before clarity had time to catch up. Every unattended bag could become a threat. Every nervous glance could become suspicion. Every irregular detail could justify intervention. Over time, Reynolds stopped noticing how often his instincts followed familiar paths. He simply trusted that years of repetition had made him accurate. That morning, however, his thoughts were less focused than usual. At 6:10 a.m., he had received an email from Internal Performance Review requesting documentation regarding 3 prior complaints filed by passengers claiming they had been subjected to unnecessary escalation. The phrasing irritated him. Complaints were common. People did not enjoy being questioned. That did not mean officers were wrong to ask questions. Still, the timing of the email had unsettled him. His supervisor had also mentioned that airport policing policies would soon undergo additional oversight training regarding implicit bias indicators. The phrase felt accusatory. Reynolds had never considered himself biased. He considered himself observant, careful, proactive. If anything, he believed he noticed details others ignored. Which was why when he observed Dr. Aaliyah Carter moving calmly through the TSA pre-check line, something about her presence seemed to resist immediate categorization. Travelers often displayed predictable signals. Business travelers frequently traveled in pairs or groups. Consultants often carried visible company identification. Government employees sometimes displayed badges more openly. But Aaliyah moved without visible urgency, without visible affiliation, without any obvious external indicator explaining her confidence. Her boarding pass displayed Group 1 priority. Her carry-on appeared expensive, but not ostentatious. Her demeanor calm, but self-contained. Reynolds watched as she placed her phone into the bin with measured precision. No rushing, no hesitation, no visible anxiety. Confidence without explanation sometimes felt suspicious to minds conditioned to expect hierarchy to be visible. A middle-aged traveler standing near Reynolds shifted slightly, glancing in Aaliyah's direction before speaking under his breath. Funny how some people suddenly afford business class these days. The comment was quiet enough to remain ambiguous, but its implication did not go unnoticed. Reynolds did not respond verbally. But confirmation bias rarely required conversation. He adjusted the position of his radio on his shoulder, continuing to observe. Airports trained officers to notice anomalies. Yet anomalies were often defined by expectation rather than evidence. Reynolds noted the absence of checked baggage. He noted the secure travel case. He noted the absence of visible corporate branding. He noted the solitary travel status. None of these details constituted wrongdoing, yet together they created the illusion of irregularity. He stepped closer to the screening area, positioning himself at an angle, allowing continued observation without direct confrontation. Aaliyah advanced through the line, smoothly presenting her identification to the TSA document checker with quiet professionalism. "Morning," the agent said automatically. "Good morning," she replied. Her voice was calm, neutral, courteous. Her Illinois driver's license displayed her Chicago address. Her boarding pass confirmed Washington, D.C. routine. Everything routine. Yet Reynolds remained unsatisfied. Patterns did not always present themselves clearly at first glance. Sometimes he believed they revealed themselves through subtle inconsistencies in behavior. He noticed that Aaliyah scanned the security layout briefly before stepping forward. A small observation. A normal observation for anyone accustomed to situational awareness. But Reynolds interpreted the glance differently. He leaned slightly toward a TSA officer he recognized. "You know her?" he asked quietly. The officer shook his head. Reynolds folded his arms. "I might run a secondary check," he muttered. The TSA officer hesitated briefly. "For what reason?" "Just a feeling," Reynolds replied. Feelings rarely appeared in official procedure manuals, but informal influence often operated quietly within professional environments. Aaliyah placed her laptop carefully into a separate screening bin as instructed. Her movements reflected familiarity with travel security protocols. Nothing hurried, nothing concealed, nothing irregular. Yet Reynolds stepped forward just as she prepared to pass through the body scanner. "Ma'am," he called. His voice carried enough authority to pause movement around them. Aaliyah turned calmly. "Yes, I'll need you to step aside for a moment." Her expression did not change. "Is there an issue?" "Just a few additional questions." Nearby passengers slowed their pace slightly, curiosity drawing subtle attention toward the interaction. Aaliyah nodded once. Of course, cooperation often de-escalated situations quickly, but Reynolds had already committed to a narrative in his mind, one that required confirmation, not reconsideration. He gestured toward a side area near the security checkpoint, separated by retractable belt barriers designed for secondary screening procedures. "Right this way." As she stepped aside, a young TSA agent glanced uncertainly between them. No alert had been triggered. No scanner anomaly indicated prohibited items. No behavioral red flag had been formally documented. Yet intervention had begun. Aaliyah placed her belongings neatly on the inspection table, maintaining the same composed posture she had carried since entering the terminal. Reynolds observed closely. People under pressure often revealed inconsistencies, nervous gestures, avoidant eye contact, defensive tone shifts, yet Aaliyah displayed none. Only patience. Measured patience. "Purpose of travel?" Reynolds asked. "Business," she replied calmly. "What kind of business? A scheduled federal meeting?" Reynolds raised an eyebrow slightly. "What agency?" A brief pause. "Department of Homeland Security." Reynolds almost smiled. Confidence sometimes overreached credibility. "Do you have documentation verifying that I do?" she said evenly. "But I would prefer not to display sensitive credentials unnecessarily in a public setting." Reynolds crossed his arms. "That won't be your decision today." A faint shift in the surrounding atmosphere became noticeable. Passengers nearby pretended not to watch, but they listened, carefully. Aaliyah met his gaze steadily. "Officer, I am fully compliant with screening procedures. If there is a specific concern, I'm happy to address it." Reynolds tilted his head slightly. "There is." He reached toward his radio. "I think we've got a situation." The words traveled quietly across the communication channel clipped to his shoulder. Within seconds, another officer began moving in their direction. And just like that, routine had officially ended. What began as observation had now become escalation. And escalation rarely moved backward easily. The temperature near the secondary screening area always felt slightly colder than the rest of the terminal. Not physically colder, but emotionally sharper, a space where normal travel rhythms paused and uncertainty took their place. Dr. Aaliyah Carter placed her structured graphite carry-on carefully on the inspection table, aligning the handle parallel to the table's edge. The small detail reflected habit rather than intention. Order created clarity. Clarity reduced misunderstanding. Officer Daniel Reynolds stood across from her posture. Rigid arms crossed in a stance, meant to project control. Another officer, Sergeant Kyle Mercer, approached from behind, responding to Reynolds's quiet radio call. "What's the situation?" Mercer asked, his voice neutral but attentive. Reynolds did not take his eyes off Aaliyah. "Possible identity discrepancy," he said. Mercer's gaze moved briefly to Aaliyah, scanning quickly, assessing without speaking. "Ma'am," Mercer said politely, "we just need to clarify a few details. This won't take long." Aaliyah inclined her head slightly. "I understand." Her voice remained calm, steady, composed. But calmness did not satisfy Reynolds. Confidence without visible justification irritated him in ways he rarely acknowledged. He opened the front compartment of her carry-on, removing a slim laptop, a leather-bound notebook, and a compact digital folder secured with a numeric lock. "What's in here?" Reynolds asked, holding the locked folder between two fingers, as though it represented something suspicious. "Work materials," Aaliyah replied. "What kind of work requires a locked case?" "The kind involving sensitive federal infrastructure documentation." Reynolds exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. "Convenient answer." Mercer shifted his weight slightly. "Ma'am, do you mind unlocking it for inspection? I'm authorized to transport sealed materials," Aaliyah answered. "Chain of custody protocol restricts unnecessary exposure of contents outside controlled environments." Reynolds let out a short, humorless laugh. "So now we have protocols." His tone carried a faint edge of mockery. Behind them, travelers continued to move through security, but attention had begun drifting toward the interaction. People sensed tension, even when they pretended not to. A businessman paused longer than necessary while collecting his shoes. A young woman pretended to scroll through her phone while angling the camera lens slightly toward the secondary screening area. Uncertainty attracted observation. Reynolds placed the locked folder back on the table with deliberate slowness. "Let me simplify this," he said. "You claim to be attending a federal meeting. Yes. You claim to work in security. Yes. You refuse to provide verification." "I did not refuse," Aaliyah said calmly. "I explained procedural limitations regarding sensitive credentials in unsecured public spaces." Reynolds's jaw tightened slightly. "You understand how that sounds?" "I understand exactly how this situation sounds." Mercer raised a hand, slightly signaling for moderation. "Let's keep this professional." Aaliyah maintained eye contact with Reynolds. "Officer, if there is a formal request for identification verification, I can provide documentation through appropriate channels." Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "You don't dictate channels here." The words hung in the air longer than expected. Mercer glanced briefly at Reynolds, then back to Aaliyah. "Ma'am, do you have any additional identification beyond your driver's license?" "Yes." "Would you be willing to show it?" Aaliyah considered the request carefully. Her experience had taught her that timing mattered, context mattered, authority recognition mattered. I prefer to disclose federal credentials in the presence of a supervisory TSA official, she said. Reynolds smirked faintly. So now we need supervisors. I am attempting to comply while protecting sensitive information. You're attempting to delay, Reynolds replied. The surrounding air seemed to tighten. Mercer spoke again, tone controlled. Officer Reynolds, let's focus on specific concerns. Reynolds nodded slightly, though his attention remained fixed on Aaliyah. You're traveling alone, he said. Yes. No checked luggage. Correct. Priority boarding. Yes. No visible employer identification. Not displayed publicly. Reynolds tilted his head. Do you know how often we encounter individuals misrepresenting credentials? I'm aware misrepresentation occurs. And yet you expect us to accept your explanation without verification. I expect standard procedure. Mercer cleared his throat slightly. Ma'am, we're not accusing you of wrongdoing. We simply need clarification. Aaliyah nodded once. And I am willing to clarify within appropriate protocol. Reynolds' patience thinned further. He picked up her notebook, flipping through several pages, filled with structured notes, diagrams, and references to procedural terminology unfamiliar to most casual observers. Column headings included phrases such as screening flow, disruption, analysis, behavioral flagging, threshold, variance, secondary selection, pattern, frequency. None of the notes appeared incriminating, but unfamiliar language often appeared suspicious to those unfamiliar with its context. What exactly do you analyze? Reynolds asked. Transportation security systems, and you just happen to be traveling with encrypted materials and restricted access notes. Yes. Mercer leaned slightly closer to review the notebook. His expression did not suggest concern. If anything, the terminology appeared consistent with professional analysis documentation. But Reynolds had already moved beyond curiosity. Suspicion once chosen, rarely released easily. Here's the problem, Reynolds said. You fit a profile we've been monitoring. Aaliyah's gaze remained steady. What profile would that be? Reynolds hesitated briefly, aware of the ambiguity of his own statement. Individuals attempting to bypass standard screening scrutiny, by standing calmly in line, by presenting selective cooperation. I have complied with every instruction. Mercer nodded slightly, acknowledging her statement. Reynolds noticed the subtle shift in Mercer's posture. Authority dynamics sometimes changed quietly. He reached toward his radio again, requesting verification support at Checkpoint B Secondary, he said. The response crackled softly through static acknowledgement. More personnel would arrive shortly. Aaliyah remained still, hands relaxed at her sides, posture neutral, expression composed. Passengers passing nearby slowed, subtly, drawn by the quiet escalation unfolding in an otherwise routine morning. Moments like these often felt insignificant while they occurred, but later they revealed fault lines beneath ordinary interactions. Mercer lowered his voice slightly. Ma'am, we just need to confirm a few details, and I will provide confirmation through appropriate supervisory channels. Reynolds stepped slightly closer. You don't determine procedure here. I determine how I protect federally sensitive credentials. The statement landed with quiet precision. Reynolds studied her face carefully. Confidence remained unchanged. No visible anxiety. No defensive agitation. Only patience. Patience sometimes unsettled those expecting compliance to appear nervous. Another officer approached from the far side of the checkpoint, responding to the call for verification support. Momentum had now shifted beyond simple inquiry. Once additional personnel became involved, de-escalation often became more complicated. Reynolds gestured subtly toward the inspection table. We'll need to continue this conversation in a more controlled area. Aaliyah considered the request. On what basis? On the basis that I am requesting it. Mercer spoke carefully. Ma'am, we just want to ensure clarity. Clarity often came at the cost of comfort. Aaliyah closed the notebook calmly. Very well. She gathered her belongings slowly. Around them, phones continued recording quietly, unnoticed by most participants. But not unnoticed entirely, because once attention gathers, narratives begin forming, and narratives rarely unfold predictably. The secondary inspection room sat just beyond the main TSA checkpoint, separated from the public flow by a frosted glass partition that muted the constant movement of travelers outside. The room itself was functional, minimal, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. A rectangular metal table stood at the center, surrounded by 3 rigid chairs bolted to the floor. A wall-mounted camera faced the table, its small red indicator light glowing steadily. Dr. Aaliyah Carter entered without hesitation. Her steps remained measured, controlled, neither rushed nor reluctant. She placed her carry-on carefully beside the chair before sitting, folding her hands calmly in front of her. Years of high-level security briefings had conditioned her to remain composed in environments designed to test composure. Officer Daniel Reynolds remained standing for several seconds, studying her posture, as if searching for signs of concealed tension. He found none. Sergeant Kyle Mercer closed the door quietly behind them, the click of the automatic latch echoing faintly in the otherwise still room. All right, Mercer said evenly, taking the chair across from Aaliyah. Let's clear this up quickly. Reynolds remained standing a moment longer before slowly taking the chair at the head of the table, positioning himself in a way that subtly signaled authority. Aaliyah noticed the detail. She noticed everything. Reynolds slid her notebook across the metal surface again, flipping to a page filled with structured annotations. You said you analyze transportation security, he began. Yes. These notes include references to screening thresholds. Yes. And behavioral flagging frequencies. Yes. Reynolds leaned back slightly. That's not typical language for most travelers. I am not most travelers. Mercer suppressed the hint of a smile that almost appeared. Reynolds did not. What agency did you say you worked with? I said I am scheduled to meet with personnel from the Department of Homeland Security. That's not the same as working for them. It is when you are contracted as a federal security advisor. Reynolds tapped the table lightly with 2 fingers. Convenient phrasing. Aaliyah remained still. You are welcome to contact DHS verification channels. We will, Reynolds replied. But first, we need clarity regarding the materials in your possession. He gestured toward the encrypted folder. What exactly is contained in this case? Operational analysis reports. Specific to which airports, I am not authorized to disclose that in an unsecured environment. Reynolds exhaled slowly. You keep saying that. Because the answer does not change, Mercer interjected calmly. Ma'am, you understand that restricted documentation can raise concerns during travel. Yes. And yet you chose not to pre-clear your materials. They are pre-cleared. With whom relevant federal oversight offices? Reynolds leaned forward again. And yet local airport law enforcement was not notified. Local law enforcement is not typically briefed on federal evaluation audits. The word audit lingered in the air. Mercer glanced briefly at Reynolds. Reynolds noticed. You're claiming you're here to evaluate airport security procedures. I am here to attend a briefing. Convenient overlap. Coincidental overlap. Reynolds slid her laptop toward himself. Password. I am not authorized to unlock federally secured devices without proper clearance request documentation. That's not how this works. That is precisely how this works. Mercer raised his hand slightly again. Let's remain constructive. Reynolds' patience continued thinning. You expect us to accept your statements without verification. I expect due process. You are not under arrest. Then I expect to proceed to my gate. The quiet firmness in her tone shifted the energy in the room. Reynolds' jaw tightened slightly. You are not leaving until we finish this conversation. On what grounds? On the grounds that your documentation raises questions. Questions do not equal probable cause. Reynolds leaned closer. Refusal to cooperate can. I have not refused cooperation. You have refused access. I have refused improper access. Mercer leaned back slightly, observing the exchange carefully. Power struggles often revealed themselves through language rather than volume. Reynolds opened her notebook again, scanning structured bullet points referencing anomaly distribution ratios. You study how officers identify suspicious travelers, he said. I study how systems identify risk indicators. And yet here you are, refusing transparency. I am maintaining protocol. Reynolds shook his head faintly. You see the irony. I see procedural inconsistency. Mercer spoke calmly. Officer Reynolds, let's focus on verifiable information. Reynolds nodded slowly. All right. He turned back to Aaliyah. You claim to have federal authorization. Yes. You claim your materials are secured. Yes. You claim your presence here is legitimate. Yes. Then you shouldn't mind providing verification. I have already agreed to provide verification through appropriate supervisory channels. Reynolds leaned back again, studying her expression. Still calm. Still steady. Still unshaken. Confidence without visible hierarchy continued unsettling him. He reached toward his radio once more. Requesting TSA supervisory presence at interview room 2, he said quietly. Static crackled in response. Aaliyah observed the interaction silently. She had anticipated escalation. What she had not anticipated was how quickly assumption had replaced procedure. Mercer folded his hands. Ma'am, while we wait for supervisory confirmation, I need to ask a few additional questions. Of course. How frequently do you travel twice per month on average? Domestic or international? Primarily domestic. And you consistently transport restricted materials when required. Mercer nodded. Do you typically inform TSA in advance when appropriate? And today's documentation was filed through federal channels. Reynolds watched carefully. Consistency in answers often indicated preparation. But preparation did not necessarily indicate deception. Still, he remained unconvinced. Why no visible credentials, Reynolds asked. Because visible credentials create unnecessary exposure risk. Exposure to what unauthorized duplication? Mercer exchanged a brief glance with Reynolds. The answer aligned with known federal protocol concerns. Reynolds tapped the metal table again. I've encountered individuals claiming federal affiliation before. And how many produced documentation through proper channels? Some. And how many were subjected to unnecessary escalation? Mercer shifted slightly in his seat. The question lingered. Reynolds' expression hardened. We're simply ensuring security. And so am I. Silence settled briefly across the room. Outside the frosted glass partition, blurred movement indicated continued airport activity. Inside, time felt slower, measured, careful. Because escalation once initiated rarely reversed quickly. And sometimes the moment suspicion hardens, resolution becomes more complicated. Especially when assumptions begin shaping decisions before verification occurs. A soft knock sounded against the frosted glass door. Reynolds glanced toward it. The TSA supervisor had arrived. And with that arrival, the balance of authority began to shift. The knock on the frosted glass door was soft, but the effect inside the room was immediate. Sergeant Kyle Mercer turned his head slightly. Officer Daniel Reynolds straightened in his chair. Dr. Aaliyah Carter remained still. The door opened slowly, revealing TSA Supervisory Officer Linda Martinez, a woman in her early 40s whose calm demeanor reflected years of experience navigating tense encounters without escalating them further. "Morning," Martinez said evenly as she stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. Reynolds gestured toward the table. "We have a traveler claiming federal affiliation but declining to provide immediate verification." Martinez nodded once, her gaze shifting to Aaliyah with professional neutrality. "Ma'am, I'm Supervisor Martinez. I understand there are questions regarding documentation." Aaliyah inclined her head politely. "Yes, Supervisor. I am prepared to verify credentials through appropriate secure channels." Martinez studied her expression carefully. Years of experience had sharpened her ability to distinguish between defensiveness and composure rooted in confidence. "I appreciate your cooperation," Martinez said calmly. Reynolds leaned back slightly. "She's refusing to unlock her laptop and restricted folder." Martinez did not immediately respond. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat at the table, positioning herself at equal distance between Reynolds and Aaliyah. Balance mattered, especially when tension threatened objectivity. "Dr. Carter Martinez," said gently, reading the name from the driver's license placed on the table. "Can you confirm your destination today?" "Washington, D.C., and the purpose of travel, a scheduled security briefing." Martinez nodded. "And your role, Federal Security Advisor under DHS Consultation Authority." Reynolds exhaled faintly through his nose. Martinez noticed. "Officer Reynolds," she said evenly, "have any prohibited items been identified? Any irregular scan results? Number or any behavioral escalation observed?" She declined to provide immediate verification. Martinez turned back to Aaliyah. "Ma'am, can you clarify the nature of your materials, operational review documentation regarding aviation screening consistency?" Martinez nodded slowly. "That category may fall under restricted disclosure guidelines." Reynolds shifted in his chair. "Or it may be a convenient description." Martinez did not react to the comment. Instead, she maintained focus on procedural clarity. "Dr. Carter, are you able to provide verification through DHS liaison contact?" "Yes." "Do you have a point of contact reference number?" "Yes." Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "Why not provide that immediately?" Aaliyah's tone remained calm. "Because verification protocols typically require supervisory presence before disclosure of classified contact pathways." Martinez's eyes moved briefly toward Reynolds. "That is not an unreasonable precaution." Reynolds folded his arms. "Or it is a delay tactic." Aaliyah remained composed. "I have no interest in delaying my own federal briefing." Martinez spoke again, tone steady. "Officer Reynolds, we will follow verification protocol." Reynolds did not respond verbally, but his posture signaled disagreement. Martinez turned her attention fully toward Aaliyah. "Dr. Carter, I will contact DHS verification liaison using secure communication." "Thank you." Martinez stood, stepping toward the corner of the room, where a secure internal line was mounted beside the wall camera system. She dialed a sequence of numbers from memory, then entered a supervisor authorization code. The room remained silent while the connection processed. Reynolds tapped his fingers once against the table surface. Impatience surfaced in small gestures. Aaliyah noticed. Martinez spoke quietly into the phone. "Supervisor Martinez, TSA, O'Hare. Checkpoint B. Secondary review. Requesting credential confirmation through DHS Advisory Registry." Pause. "Yes." She read a short reference sequence from Aaliyah's documentation. Pause again. Reynolds observed carefully. Moments stretched longer when outcomes remained uncertain. Martinez's expression remained neutral as she listened. Then her posture shifted slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to indicate confirmation. "I understand," Martinez said. "Yes." Another pause. "Yes, she is present." Martinez glanced briefly toward Aaliyah before speaking again. "Understood." She ended the call. Silence lingered briefly in the room. Reynolds leaned forward. "Well," Martinez returned to the table slowly. "Preliminary verification confirms federal advisory status." Reynolds' jaw tightened slightly. "Preliminary." Martinez nodded. "Full verification requires encrypted credential confirmation." Reynolds gestured toward the laptop, which she refuses to unlock. Aaliyah spoke calmly. "I will unlock the device once secure confirmation parameters are acknowledged." Martinez nodded once. "That is acceptable procedure." Reynolds's frustration became more visible. "You're accepting statements without full evidence." "We are following structured verification steps," Martinez replied evenly. Mercer leaned back slightly, allowing the supervisor to guide the interaction. Reynolds studied Aaliyah carefully. Still calm, still controlled, still unwilling to concede to informal pressure. "You understand?" Reynolds said slowly that refusal to provide immediate access complicates matters. "I understand that improper access creates larger complications." Martinez placed her hands lightly on the table surface. "Dr. Carter, once encrypted confirmation is complete. We will proceed accordingly." Aaliyah nodded. "I appreciate procedural clarity." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Meanwhile, we still need assurance that no prohibited materials are present. You have already scanned all physical items. Digital content can also pose risks, and digital content is governed by federal encryption protections." Martinez spoke calmly. "Officer Reynolds, at this stage we maintain professional process." Reynolds did not respond immediately. Instead, he observed Aaliyah's posture again. No visible anxiety. No visible irritation, only steady patience. Patience sometimes felt like resistance when control felt challenged. Martinez's phone vibrated softly in her hand. She glanced down briefly. An encrypted confirmation code had arrived. She turned the screen slightly toward Aaliyah. "Please confirm this authentication string." Aaliyah reviewed the code carefully, then nodded once. "Confirmed." Martinez entered the final verification input. A quiet chime signaled successful credential authentication. The room's dynamic shifted subtly, not dramatically, but noticeably. Reynolds observed the change in Martinez's expression. Professional neutrality remained, yet the tension had recalibrated. Verification had begun validating Aaliyah's claims, and with each confirmed detail, assumption lost ground. But momentum once initiated rarely stopped instantly, because decisions made too early often required consequences later. And Officer Reynolds was beginning to understand that this interaction was no longer proceeding in the direction he had anticipated. Verification did not calm Officer Daniel Reynolds. If anything, it unsettled him further. The small confirmation chime from Supervisor Martinez's secure device had shifted the atmosphere in the room, but not in the way Reynolds preferred. Instead of validating his suspicions, the developing information seemed to reduce his authority in real time, and that was a position he had never learned to accept easily. Reynolds had spent most of his career believing that confidence signaled competence, that control signaled safety, that hesitation invited risk. Now, however, the calm woman seated across from him had introduced uncertainty into a situation he had already mentally resolved. He did not like unresolved situations. He especially did not like unresolved situations that others might interpret as mistakes. Martinez reviewed the verification screen carefully. "Credential status confirmed through advisory registry," she said evenly. Reynolds folded his arms. "Advisory registry doesn't grant unrestricted movement. It grants professional consideration," Martinez replied. Aaliyah remained silent, observing the exchange without interruption. Mercer shifted slightly in his seat, sensing the subtle shift in authority balance. "Officer Reynolds," Mercer said carefully, "we may want to reassess the need for continued escalation." Reynolds's jaw tightened. "She still hasn't unlocked the device." Aaliyah responded calmly. "The device contains restricted federal analysis materials. Access requires documented authorization." Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "You're in an airport security office. I am aware of the location. And security offices require transparency. Security offices also require procedural compliance." Martinez placed her hands lightly on the table. "Dr. Carter, are you prepared to provide encrypted credential confirmation through device authentication?" "Yes." "Then we can proceed." Aaliyah reached calmly into her blazer pocket and retrieved her phone, opening a secure authentication application. The interface required biometric confirmation, followed by a rotating access key. Reynolds watched closely. Confidence still radiated from her posture. He did not trust confidence he did not control. "What exactly are you consulting on?" Reynolds asked. "Screening pattern consistency and behavioral flagging accuracy. So you evaluate officers. I evaluate systems, and officers are part of systems." "Yes." Reynolds leaned back slightly, his tone shifting subtly. "So today you just happened to experience the system firsthand." Aaliyah met his gaze evenly. "Yes." Mercer cleared his throat quietly. Martinez maintained focus. "Dr. Carter, please proceed with device verification." Aaliyah entered a sequence of credentials on her phone, then connected it to her laptop using an encrypted cable stored inside the laptop case. The laptop screen illuminated, displaying a secure federal access portal. A rotating government authentication seal appeared briefly before transitioning to a credential confirmation page. Martinez reviewed the screen carefully. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her posture shifted. Reynolds noticed. "What does it say?" he asked. Martinez did not immediately respond. Instead, she read the authorization classification line again. Then she looked toward Aaliyah. "Your clearance includes procedural evaluation authority." "Yes." Mercer exhaled slowly. Reynolds leaned forward. "Evaluation authority over what scope?" Aaliyah answered calmly. "Over screening process consistency across selected federal transportation hubs." Reynolds's expression hardened slightly. "You're auditing airports." "I am reviewing operational compliance." Martinez closed the laptop halfway. "That is sufficient verification." Reynolds shook his head faintly. "No, it isn't." Martinez turned toward him. "Officer Reynolds' credential confirmation has been completed. She still transported restricted material without prior notification to airport police." Martinez responded evenly. "Federal advisory travel does not require prior disclosure to local law enforcement unless operational risk indicators exist." Reynolds stood from his chair. "I still have concerns." Aaliyah remained seated. On what grounds? Reynolds paced once toward the frosted glass wall, then back. "Unusual travel pattern. Business travel is unusual solo priority boarding. That is common. Encrypted materials. That is expected." Reynolds stopped pacing. "You could be misrepresenting clearance level." Martinez spoke firmly. "Encrypted verification confirms identity." Reynolds exhaled slowly. "I'm not comfortable concluding yet." Mercer shifted forward slightly. Daniel. Reynolds raised a hand slightly, signaling silence. Then he turned toward the door. I'm requesting temporary detainment authority pending further confirmation. Martinez's posture straightened immediately. On what basis security discretion? Martinez's voice became firmer. Detainment requires articulable suspicion. Reynolds opened the door slightly, gesturing toward an officer outside. Stand by. Aaliyah remained still. Her hands rested calmly on the table, her breathing steady. Years of experience had prepared her for institutional resistance when procedures challenged assumptions. Mercer spoke carefully. Daniel, this is not proportionate. Reynolds responded quietly. I decide what's proportionate. Martinez stood. This action requires justification. Reynolds turned back toward Aaliyah. Until I am fully satisfied, you will remain here. Aaliyah's voice remained calm. I am already late for a federal briefing. You should have cooperated earlier. I have cooperated fully. You have cooperated selectively. I have complied lawfully. Reynolds removed a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic sound as the cuffs shifted caught Mercer's immediate attention. Daniel, Mercer said quietly. Reynolds did not respond. His focus remained fixed on Aaliyah. Please stand, Reynolds said. Martinez stepped slightly forward. This is unnecessary. Reynolds's voice remained controlled but firm. Please stand, ma'am. Aaliyah did not move immediately. Her gaze remained steady. This action exceeds procedural necessity. Reynolds tilted his head slightly. Stand. The room felt smaller suddenly, heavier. Mercer exchanged a quick glance with Martinez. Authority tension had now crossed into visible escalation. Aaliyah rose slowly from the chair. Calm, measured, unhurried. Reynolds stepped behind her. Metal clicked softly. Cold steel circled her wrists. The sound echoed louder than expected inside the small room. Martinez's expression tightened. Officer Reynolds, this will require formal documentation. It will receive documentation. Mercer looked toward the wall camera. Recording light still active. Procedure would now follow consequence. Reynolds guided Aaliyah toward the door. We're continuing this outside. The door opened. Beyond the frosted glass, movement in the terminal continued. Unaware that a decision made in confidence was about to become very public. The moment the frosted glass door opened, the controlled tension of the private room dissolved into the unpredictable energy of the public terminal. Noise returned instantly. Rolling suitcases echoed across polished floors. Boarding announcements crackled overhead. The sharp aroma of coffee drifted from a nearby cafe kiosk. Life continued normally for most travelers. But normal disappeared the second Officer Daniel Reynolds guided Dr. Aaliyah Carter into the open walkway with her wrists restrained behind her back. Heads turned almost immediately. The subtle shift in attention spread outward like ripples across water. Travelers sensed disruption before understanding its cause. A mother paused while adjusting her child's backpack. A businessman slowed mid-step while pulling his jacket sleeve straight. Two college students stopped walking entirely. Because something about the image felt wrong. A woman dressed in professional business attire, composed posture, calm expression, walking in handcuffs. Public perception often formed conclusions faster than facts could correct them. Reynolds maintained a firm grip on Aaliyah's arm, guiding her toward a waiting area near the secondary inspection corridor. His expression remained fixed in procedural seriousness, but the firmness of his grip communicated more than procedure. It communicated certainty, certainty he had not yet earned. Sergeant Kyle Mercer walked slightly behind them, his expression more restrained, more cautious. Supervisor Martinez followed as well, her posture signaling concern rather than authority. Passengers nearby began whispering, not loudly, but audibly enough. What happened? She looks like a business traveler. Maybe fraud. Could be identity theft. Phones began appearing. First one, then another. The quiet glow of recording screens reflected off the polished airport floor. Aaliyah walked steadily. No resistance, no visible anger, no raised voice, only quiet composure that contrasted sharply with the spectacle unfolding around her. Reynolds noticed the growing attention. He did not slow. He did not loosen his grip. Public settings often reinforced authority displays, and authority once performed publicly often became harder to retract. They reached a small holding area near the corridor intersection where passengers exited the TSA checkpoint. A uniformed TSA agent paused mid-step, eyes briefly widening at the sight. Martinez spoke quietly to the agent. "Continue standard flow," but attention had already gathered. A man in a navy suit raised his phone higher. A woman whispered to her companion, "This seems excessive." Another voice responded quietly, "They wouldn't do it without reason." Assumptions formed quickly in environments defined by incomplete information. Reynolds positioned Aaliyah near the wall beside the inspection area, maintaining hold of her arm. "You understand this could have been avoided," he said quietly. Aaliyah's voice remained calm. "I complied with every lawful instruction. You resisted transparency. I protected restricted information. You made this more difficult than necessary. You escalated without justification." Reynolds's jaw tightened. "Cooperation means compliance. Compliance does not mean surrendering protocol." Mercer glanced briefly toward Martinez. The exchange was attracting more attention than ideal. Martinez stepped closer. "Officer Reynolds, we should reconsider public exposure." Reynolds responded without looking at her. "This will conclude shortly." But public attention had already transformed the situation into something larger than procedure. A teenage traveler whispered to her friend, "Why is she in handcuffs? I don't know. She doesn't look dangerous." Aaliyah's posture remained upright, dignified, controlled. Years of professional experience had prepared her for scrutiny, but public humiliation created a different form of pressure, not because it weakened composure, but because it revealed how quickly perception could override fact. A businessman approached slightly closer than necessary, attempting to overhear conversation. Reynolds noticed and stepped subtly to block his proximity. "This is an active investigation," he said firmly. The businessman stepped back, but he did not lower his phone. Mercer spoke quietly. "Daniel, we've confirmed credentials. Partially. Enough to reconsider restraints." Reynolds shook his head faintly. "Procedure requires resolution." Martinez's tone remained calm, but firmer. "Procedure also requires proportional response." Reynolds did not respond immediately. Authority conflicts rarely resolved publicly. Aaliyah shifted her weight slightly, adjusting balance due to the restrictive position of the handcuffs. Even that small movement drew additional attention, because small details amplified discomfort in public spaces. Another TSA agent approached cautiously. Supervisor Martinez nodded. "Continue operations." The agent glanced briefly toward Aaliyah before returning to checkpoint duties. The quiet exchange did not go unnoticed by travelers observing nearby. Narratives continued forming. Without facts, without context, only visual interpretation. Aaliyah spoke quietly. "I would prefer this be resolved promptly." Reynolds responded evenly. "It will be." Mercer observed both carefully. Moments like this often created irreversible reputational consequences, even when resolved correctly, even when corrected quickly. Public memory rarely captured full context. Only images. Images traveled quickly. Images rarely waited for explanation. Aaliyah's leather wallet, previously placed inside her blazer pocket, shifted slightly as Reynolds adjusted his grip on her arm. The movement loosened the interior compartment closure. A small metallic object slipped free. The object fell silently at first, then struck the polished floor with a faint but distinct sound. A subtle metallic slide across smooth surface. Martinez noticed first, then Mercer. Reynolds did not. The object rotated once before coming to rest near the edge of the inspection corridor light. A brushed metal badge. Compact. Unassuming. Yet unmistakably official in design. Martinez stepped forward slowly. She bent carefully, retrieving the item from the floor. Her eyes focused instantly on the engraved insignia. Her expression changed. Subtly, but unmistakably. Her posture straightened. Her breathing paused for half a second longer than normal. Mercer noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Martinez did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved from the badge to Aaliyah, then briefly toward Reynolds. Travelers nearby noticed the shift in body language. Silence spread unevenly across the small area, because authority, when surprised, created visible tension. Martinez turned the badge, slightly confirming the embedded authentication seal. Her voice lowered. "Officer Reynolds." Reynolds turned. What Martinez's tone remained controlled, but the weight in her voice changed the atmosphere instantly. "You may want to reconsider the current posture." Reynolds frowned slightly. Why Martinez held the badge at a slight angle so only he could see. The engraved federal seal reflected softly under terminal lighting. Reynolds' eyes narrowed, then widened slightly, and for the first time since the interaction began, his certainty hesitated. Because the symbol engraved into the metal surface represented something unmistakable, something not easily explained away, something that immediately shifted authority dynamics. And suddenly, the narrative no longer belonged to assumption. It belonged to fact. For a brief moment, the busy terminal seemed to lose its rhythm. The distant rolling of suitcases faded into the background. Conversations softened. Even the overhead announcements felt muted, as if the air itself hesitated to interrupt what was unfolding near the secondary inspection corridor. Supervisor Linda Martinez held the badge carefully between her fingers, her eyes scanning the finely engraved seal a second time, then a third. The brushed metal surface reflected the overhead lighting just enough to make the embossed lettering unmistakable. Department of Homeland Security. Office of Transportation Risk Assessment. Special Advisory Clearance. Martinez felt a subtle tightening in her chest. Not fear. Recognition. The badge design did not belong to general administrative staff. It belonged to individuals authorized to evaluate systemic vulnerabilities within federal transportation infrastructure. Individuals granted clearance not only to observe procedure, but to question it. Quietly, thoroughly, without advance public disclosure. Martinez lifted her gaze slowly toward Dr. Aaliyah Carter, who stood calmly with her hands still restrained behind her back. Aaliyah did not speak. She did not demand an explanation. She did not display frustration. She simply waited. That composure spoke louder than protest ever could. Mercer stepped slightly closer. "What is it?" he asked, again, lowering his voice instinctively. Martinez angled the badge so Mercer could see. Mercer's eyes focused immediately on the insignia. His brow tightened. He looked again. Carefully. Then exhaled slowly. "That's federal evaluation clearance," he murmured. Reynolds remained where he stood, arms still positioned near Aaliyah's restrained wrists, though his grip had loosened almost imperceptibly. "What exactly does it say?" Reynolds asked. Martinez did not immediately respond. Instead, she rotated the badge slightly so Reynolds could read the engraved lines himself. He leaned closer. His eyes scanned the metal surface, first casually, then more carefully. Then again. The subtle confidence that had defined his posture since the beginning of the encounter began to falter. Special advisory status. Tier 4 clearance recognition. Authorized operational observation access. Reynolds blinked once as if rereading would alter the meaning. It did not. "That could be replicated," Reynolds said quietly, though the conviction in his voice had weakened. Martinez shook her head slightly. "Embedded authentication chip," she replied. She turned the badge once more, revealing the micro-etched verification code embedded near the lower edge. Not visible without close inspection, not easily duplicated. Mercer crossed his arms slowly, his posture no longer defensive, but reflective. "Daniel." Reynolds did not respond. He continued studying the badge, searching instinctively for inconsistencies. Authority often struggled to accept reversal. Martinez spoke carefully. "This credential level typically accompanies oversight evaluations. Oversight of what Reynolds asked. Oversight of procedural integrity." The phrase carried weight. Reynolds' eyes shifted briefly toward Aaliyah. She met his gaze steadily. No satisfaction. No accusation, only quiet certainty. Martinez turned slightly toward Aaliyah. "Dr. Carter, is this badge currently active under DHS directive?" "Yes," Aaliyah answered calmly. "Scope designation, transportation security, procedural consistency review." Martinez nodded once. Mercer exhaled again, slower this time. Travelers nearby continued observing discreetly, sensing the shift in energy without fully understanding its cause. One man lowered his phone slightly, uncertain what exactly he was witnessing. Because when authority dynamics change, confusion often replaces assumption. Reynolds cleared his throat once. "You did not present this earlier." Aaliyah's tone remained even. "I requested supervisory presence before disclosing restricted credentials." Martinez's eyes moved briefly toward Reynolds. That request was reasonable. Reynolds shifted his stance. Public posture began conflicting with private realization. "You could have clarified sooner," Reynolds said. "I attempted to clarify through proper protocol." Mercer spoke quietly. "Daniel, this changes context." Reynolds exhaled slowly. The realization that multiple travelers had already recorded portions of the encounter added complexity to the moment. Public perception did not wait for explanation. Public perception rarely waited for verification. Martinez spoke again, voice measured. "Dr. Carter, we will need to confirm badge authentication through secure registry." "Of course." Martinez removed a handheld verification scanner from her belt pouch, activating the device with a brief thumb press. A small blue light illuminated the scanning surface. She positioned the badge over the sensor. The scanner emitted a soft digital tone. Processing. Verification. Confirmation. A small green indicator light appeared. Valid. Martinez lowered the scanner slowly. Her posture changed again. Not dramatically, but decisively. She looked toward Reynolds. Credential authenticity confirmed. Reynolds's shoulders shifted slightly. Tension rarely disappeared instantly, but certainty had begun eroding. Aaliyah remained calm, still restrained, still composed, still waiting. Mercer glanced briefly toward the cuffs, then toward Reynolds. Silence settled unevenly between them, because the moment had reached a point where authority required adjustment. Public attention had not disappeared. Travelers nearby sensed change. Whispers softened. Phones lowered slightly. Narratives began rewriting themselves quietly. Martinez spoke gently. "Dr. Carter, I apologize for the delay in verification." Aaliyah nodded once. "I understand procedural caution." Reynolds finally released his grip on her arm, though the cuffs remained in place. His voice, when he spoke, carried less certainty than before. "You understand our responsibility to ensure safety." "I understand responsibility," Aaliyah replied. Martinez's expression grew more serious. "We will resolve this immediately." Mercer stepped slightly closer. "Daniel." Reynolds did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied the badge one more time, as if hoping the engraved authority would appear less definitive upon repeated viewing. It did not, because symbols of responsibility carry weight beyond assumption. And sometimes, the smallest object can shift the balance of an entire situation, especially when that object confirms that the person being questioned may also be the one asking questions. The quiet confirmation tone from the handheld scanner seemed almost insignificant. Yet in that moment, it carried more authority than any raised voice ever could. Supervisor Linda Martinez stared at the small green indicator light for half a second longer than necessary, as if giving her mind time to fully process what the system had just confirmed. Valid. Not provisional. Not partial. Valid. The badge in her hand was not merely legitimate. It represented one of the highest advisory clearance levels granted to civilian federal security specialists working in transportation risk analysis, Department of Homeland Security, Office of Transportation Risk Assessment, Special Advisory Clearance, Tier 4. This level of authorization did not belong to casual consultants. It belonged to individuals entrusted to evaluate systemic weaknesses before those weaknesses could become national vulnerabilities. Martinez slowly lifted her eyes toward Dr. Aaliyah Carter. Aaliyah stood calmly, her wrists still secured behind her back, the metal cuffs catching the overhead light in a way that now felt deeply uncomfortable to observe. Just moments earlier, those cuffs had symbolized authority. Now they symbolized misjudgment. Aaliyah did not rush the moment. She did not protest. She did not demand recognition. She simply waited. Because she understood something many people did not. Systems often reveal their true nature when they believe no one important is watching. Sergeant Kyle Mercer crossed his arms, slowly absorbing the shift in reality. That clearance designation typically accompanies active oversight assignments, Mercer said quietly. Martinez nodded once. Yes. Officer Daniel Reynolds remained silent, his eyes fixed on the badge, as if studying its surface might somehow produce an alternate interpretation. It did not. The embedded authentication chip remained visible beneath angled light. The micro-etched serial code aligned perfectly with DHS registry format. The digital verification had confirmed the credential twice. "You could have presented this earlier," Reynolds finally said. His voice remained controlled, but the confidence that had defined his tone earlier had begun to fade. Aaliyah met his gaze calmly. "I requested supervisory presence before disclosing restricted credentials." Martinez spoke carefully. "That request aligns with federal protocol regarding controlled identification exposure." Reynolds shifted slightly, becoming aware that several travelers still lingered within viewing distance, quietly observing the unfolding reversal. Only minutes earlier, public perception had already begun forming conclusions. Now those conclusions no longer felt stable. "What is the scope of your authority?" Mercer asked. Aaliyah answered clearly. "I was assigned to observe procedural consistency across secondary screening selection patterns at designated transportation hubs." Martinez tilted her head slightly. "That includes behavioral indicator thresholds." "Yes." Reynolds frowned faintly. "You are evaluating officer decision-making. I am evaluating system reliability. That includes how officers interpret suspicion." "Yes." Silence settled between them for several seconds, because the implication could not be ignored. This interaction itself had become part of the evaluation. Reynolds exhaled slowly through his nose. So this entire encounter becomes data. All authentic procedural encounters contribute to accurate assessment, Aaliyah replied. Her tone remained neutral. Professional, without accusation. Yet the meaning remained unmistakable. Martinez's voice became more direct. "Officer Reynolds, the restraints should be removed immediately." Reynolds hesitated briefly, then reached for the handcuffs. The metallic click echoed softly, yet the sound seemed louder than before, because now the sound marked reversal. Aaliyah slowly brought her hands forward, gently rotating her wrists once to restore circulation. She did not exaggerate discomfort. She did not display frustration. Her composure remained intact. Martinez extended the badge respectfully. "Dr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for the handling of this situation." Aaliyah accepted the credential calmly. "I recognize the importance of maintaining vigilance in high-security environments." Reynolds crossed his arms again, though the posture no longer communicated authority. "You understand why irregular indicators require investigation," he said. "I understand that investigative indicators must be applied consistently," Aaliyah replied. Mercer gave a small nod. Consistency was the cornerstone of effective security frameworks. Consistency reduced bias. Consistency improved predictive accuracy. Consistency strengthened institutional credibility. Martinez briefly glanced toward the wall-mounted security camera above the corridor. Every moment of the encounter had been recorded, from the initial questioning, to the public restraint, to the verification process. Documentation would now follow. Review would follow documentation. Review often produced reform. Reynolds spoke again, his voice quieter now. "You are conducting a live operational review." "Yes, and you chose not to notify local airport law enforcement. Disclosure would compromise observational authenticity." Mercer shifted his stance slightly. "That aligns with randomized federal oversight protocol." Reynolds exhaled slowly. The realization settling in was not comfortable. The situation he believed demonstrated vigilance, now suggested procedural imbalance. Martinez spoke carefully. "Dr. Carter, your boarding time is approaching. We can arrange expedited clearance to prevent delay." Aaliyah shook her head slightly. "That will not be necessary." Martinez paused. "You prefer standard screening?" "Yes." Mercer allowed the faintest expression of respect to appear. Professional integrity often revealed itself through consistency of behavior under pressure. Reynolds remained silent, because the shift in authority was now undeniable. The individual he had restrained was the individual authorized to evaluate whether restraint had been justified. Aaliyah placed the badge carefully back inside her wallet, ensuring the credential remained protected, yet accessible. Discreet, professional, controlled. She lifted her carry-on calmly, her posture unchanged from the moment she first entered the terminal that morning. Before stepping back toward the TSA screening line, she spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Security systems function best when vigilance is guided by fairness." The statement was not emotional. It was factual. Mercer lowered his gaze slightly, reflecting on the precision of the observation. Martinez nodded once in quiet acknowledgement. Reynolds did not respond immediately, because reflection rarely produces instant answers. Around them, travelers gradually resumed their normal pace. Phones lowered, whispers softened, movement returned. Yet something invisible had changed, because assumptions once challenged do not simply disappear. They remain. They inform. They reshape future decisions. As Aaliyah stepped forward, blending once again into the steady flow of travelers moving toward Gates' destinations, responsibilities, the system she had been assigned to evaluate had revealed something important. Not collapse, not failure, but vulnerability. And vulnerability, when acknowledged honestly, creates the opportunity for improvement. Officer Daniel Reynolds had built his entire career on the belief that hesitation created danger. For more than 20 years, he had trusted that quick decisions protected lives. Airports moved fast. Threats evolved quickly. There was rarely time to debate instincts once a situation began to unfold. That belief had served him well. Until this moment. As Dr. Aaliyah Carter calmly placed her federal badge back into her wallet, the quiet certainty Reynolds relied upon began to feel fragile. The narrative he had formed only minutes earlier, the belief that he had identified a potential risk before others noticed, no longer aligned with reality. The person he had restrained was authorized to evaluate the very system he represented. Supervisor Linda Martinez maintained her professional composure, but her focus had sharpened. Situations involving verified DHS advisory personnel did not simply disappear once resolved. They triggered process, structured process, documented process, accountability process. Martinez activated the incident reporting interface on her secured tablet, the screen illuminating a structured form designed for objective documentation rather than interpretation. Time of initial contact, observed indicators, reason for escalation, justification for restraint. Each category required clear articulation, each word chosen carefully, because documentation transformed momentary decisions into permanent record. Sergeant Kyle Mercer shifted his stance slightly beside Reynolds, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "Daniel, we need to be precise here." Reynolds nodded once, though his posture had lost the rigid confidence that defined him earlier. "I acted within my discretion," Reynolds said. Martinez did not immediately respond. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most. What specific indicators justified physical restraint? Reynolds exhaled slowly. The subject declined immediate credential verification. Aaliyah's voice remained calm. "I requested supervisory presence before presenting restricted federal identification." Martinez typed the clarification into the report. Subject requested supervisory verification prior to credential disclosure. Mercer added carefully. Subject complied with all screening instructions. Martinez included the note. No prohibited items identified. No resistance observed. No escalation initiated by subject. Each line narrowed the interpretive space available to justify the escalation that had occurred. Reynolds shifted his weight slightly. "I observed irregular behavioral presentation," he said. Martinez looked up briefly. "Define irregular. Solo traveler with priority boarding classification, limited visible professional identification, transporting secured materials." Aaliyah remained composed. Professional identification is not typically displayed publicly for federal consultants. Martinez documented the exchange neutrally, encrypted materials consistent with subject's verified advisory role. Reynolds folded his arms, his voice quieter now. I believed the subject was withholding information. Aaliyah answered evenly. I followed disclosure protocol. Mercer spoke calmly. Protocol delay does not equal obstruction. Martinez entered the clarification. Subject delayed disclosure pending supervisory confirmation. The distinction mattered, because language shaped interpretation. Interpretation shaped policy review. Policy review shaped future decisions. Reynolds glanced briefly toward the small security camera mounted above the corridor. Every second of the interaction had been captured. From the initial stop, to the questioning, to the decision to use restraints. Recorded actions left little room for narrative revision. I made a judgment call, Reynolds said. Aaliyah's response remained analytical. Judgment calls require consistent thresholds. Her tone contained no accusation, only clarity. Martinez continued documenting, observed subject demeanor calm cooperative, observed escalation trigger officer discretion. Mercer shifted slightly, his expression thoughtful. Discretion without consistent criteria introduced variability. Variability introduced risk. Risk reduced reliability. Reliability formed the foundation of security effectiveness. Martinez completed the first section of the report and looked toward Reynolds again. This interaction will be reviewed through compliance oversight channels. Reynolds nodded once. That is expected. Martinez continued. Federal involvement may extend review parameters. The implication was clear. Expanded review meant analysis beyond the individual encounter. It meant examining pattern alignment with training standards. It meant evaluating proportional response decisions. It meant determining whether discretion had been applied consistently. Reynolds remained still for several seconds, because moments of reflection rarely occurred during active enforcement. But afterward, reflection became unavoidable. Aaliyah gathered her belongings calmly, placing the encrypted folder securely inside her carry-on case. Her movements remained measured, unhurried, professional. She displayed no triumph, no resentment, only composure. Consistency often communicated confidence more effectively than explanation. Mercer spoke quietly. Dr. Carter, will this interaction influence the outcome of your review? Aaliyah answered with careful neutrality. All authentic procedural interactions contribute to evaluation accuracy. The statement was factual, professional, non-accusatory. Yet its meaning remained unmistakable. Authenticity revealed patterns. Patterns revealed vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities required correction. Martinez secured the incident file and closed the tablet. We will fully cooperate with any follow-up requests, she said. Aaliyah nodded once. Transparency strengthens operational trust. Reynolds remained silent, because transparency often required acknowledgement of uncomfortable truths. Around them, airport activity resumed its normal rhythm. Passengers moved forward. Announcements echoed overhead. The visible tension of the moment faded, but the impact remained. Because institutional processes did not forget moments like this. They studied them. They analyzed them. They learned from them. Reynolds exhaled slowly, the certainty he had relied upon earlier now replaced with quiet reconsideration. Experience provided instinct, but instinct required calibration. Calibration required reflection, and reflection often began when outcomes did not match expectations. Aaliyah adjusted the strap of her carry-on, her posture unchanged from the moment she first entered the terminal earlier that morning. Professional, composed, consistent. Because true authority rarely needed to announce itself loudly, it revealed itself through steadiness, through discipline, through quiet clarity. And now the system she had been tasked with evaluating had revealed something essential. Not failure, but imbalance. And imbalance, once recognized, created the opportunity for meaningful correction. The handcuffs opened with a soft, metallic click that seemed far too small for the gravity of the moment. For several seconds, no one spoke. Dr. Aaliyah Carter slowly brought her hands forward, maintaining the same calm composure she had shown since the beginning of the encounter. She gently flexed her fingers, restoring circulation, but did not draw attention to the faint red pressure marks left behind by the restraints. She did not demand acknowledgement. She did not raise her voice. Her restraint carried more authority than anger ever could. Only minutes earlier, Officer Daniel Reynolds had been completely certain he was preventing a potential threat. No verified federal credentials had revealed that the woman he restrained was authorized to evaluate transportation security systems at a national level. The shift in power was unmistakable. Supervisor Linda Martinez stood with composed professionalism, yet her focused expression reflected the seriousness of the situation. Incidents involving confirmed Department of Homeland Security advisory personnel did not end quietly. They required process. They required documentation. They required accountability. Officer Reynolds Martinez said calmly, her voice steady and controlled. Airport Command has been notified. We are required to complete a full compliance report regarding this interaction. Reynolds gave a short nod. He understood what that meant. Compliance report meant internal review. Internal review meant evaluation of procedural alignment. Procedural alignment determined whether discretion had been applied appropriately. Martinez stepped slightly aside and activated her secure communication device. Command, this is Supervisor Martinez at Checkpoint B Secondary Corridor. Identity verification has confirmed DHS Tier 4 Special Advisory Clearance, initiating compliance protocol documentation. Pause. Yes. Another pause. Understood. She ended the call and returned her attention to the group. Sergeant Kyle Mercer shifted slightly beside Reynolds, lowering his voice. They will want a detailed sequence timeline. Martinez nodded once. They always do when federal oversight personnel are involved. Aaliyah remained still, her posture composed, her breathing steady. She did not interrupt the process. Her calm reinforced the seriousness of the moment. Reynolds spoke carefully. I observed irregular indicators. Aaliyah responded evenly. I followed federal disclosure protocol. Her voice remained neutral, measured, professional. Martinez opened the incident report interface on her secured tablet. The digital form required objective entries rather than emotional interpretation. Initial contact location, observed behavior, reason for escalation, justification for restraint. Each field required precise language. Precise language allowed objective review. Objective review allowed institutional improvement. Martinez began entering information. No prohibited materials detected. No attempt to bypass screening. No resistance observed. Each line reduced the justification scope for escalation. Mercer added quietly. Subject complied with all screening instructions. Martinez recorded the note. Compliance indicated cooperation. Cooperation reduced threat probability. Reduced threat probability required proportional response. Reynolds exhaled slowly. I interpreted delayed credential presentation as potential misrepresentation risk. Aaliyah answered calmly. Federal protocol permits delayed disclosure until supervisory presence is confirmed. Martinez entered the clarification. Subject requested supervisor verification prior to presenting restricted credentials. Language influenced interpretation. Interpretation influenced review. Review influenced outcome. Mercer crossed his arms thoughtfully. Delay alone does not meet the threshold for physical restraint. Reynolds remained silent, because the distinction had become clear. Suspicion required evidence. Evidence required objective criteria. Objective criteria required consistency. Martinez completed the first section of documentation and looked toward Reynolds again. Pending administrative review, Command has requested temporary reassignment from active screening duty. Her tone remained neutral. Not accusatory. Procedural. Temporary reassignment did not imply final determination, but it reflected seriousness. Reynolds nodded once. I understand. Understanding process did not require agreement. It required cooperation. Mercer spoke quietly. Administrative review compares response with established training standards. Training standards emphasized proportional escalation. Proportional escalation reduced unnecessary confrontation. Reduced confrontation improved operational reliability. Martinez turned toward Aaliyah. Dr. Carter, I would like to formally apologize for the handling of this situation. Aaliyah acknowledged the statement with a slight nod. I appreciate your professionalism. Her composure remained steady. Reynolds spoke again more carefully now. My intention was to ensure safety. Aaliyah met his gaze calmly. Safety requires consistent judgment. Her words remained analytical, not emotional. Mercer nodded slightly. Consistent judgment reduced unpredictability. Unpredictability weakened institutional trust. Trust strengthened cooperation. Martinez briefly glanced toward the overhead security camera. Every moment had been recorded. Initial observation. Escalation decision. Public restraint. Credential verification. Documentation preserved sequence accuracy. Sequence accuracy allowed objective evaluation. Objective evaluation supported improvement. Aaliyah gathered her belongings carefully. Laptop secured inside her bag, encrypted folder aligned, carry-on positioned comfortably at her side. Her movements remained measured, professional, controlled. She did not display triumph. She did not display resentment. She displayed discipline. Discipline reinforced credibility. Martinez spoke again. We can arrange expedited screening to ensure your schedule remains uninterrupted. Aaliyah shook her head slightly. That will not be necessary. Martinez paused briefly. You prefer to continue through standard screening procedures, eh? Mercer allowed a subtle expression of respect to appear. Consistency under pressure reflected confidence. Reynolds remained quiet, because the shift in authority was undeniable. The individual he restrained was authorized to evaluate whether restraint had been justified. Aaliyah adjusted the strap of her carry-on calmly. Before returning toward the screening line, she spoke clearly. Effective security requires vigilance guided by fairness. The statement contained no accusation, only principle. Mercer lowered his gaze slightly in reflection. Martinez nodded once. Reynolds remained still. Because fairness, once questioned, required evaluation. Evaluation created opportunity for improvement. As Aaliyah stepped forward, merging once again into the steady flow of travelers moving toward gates and destinations, the system she had been assigned to evaluate had already demonstrated its capacity to respond. Response did not erase the moment, but it gave the moment purpose. Because accountability strengthens institutions, and strong institutions strengthen trust. News of the incident did not remain contained within the walls of Checkpoint B for long. Airports, like many structured environments, relied on communication networks that moved quietly but efficiently. Supervisors reported upward. Compliance officers documented details. Administrative reviewers flagged unusual entries for priority attention. Within hours, the encounter between Dr. Aaliyah Carter and Officer Daniel Reynolds had reached the internal review desk of Regional Transportation Oversight. Not because of public scandal, but because of procedural significance. Tier 4. Special Advisory Clearance interactions triggered mandatory evaluation. Patterns mattered. Patterns revealed vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities required correction. Inside a quiet administrative office several floors above the terminal, Compliance Director Margaret Ellison studied the preliminary report carefully. She had spent nearly 15 years reviewing operational incidents across multiple transportation hubs. Her role was not to assign blame. Her role was to identify risk patterns before they repeated. The report was structured, precise, factual. Initial observation. Escalation trigger. Restraint decision. Credential verification. Reassignment directive. Each section reflected procedural clarity, yet something within the sequence drew attention. The escalation threshold had been reached quickly. Too quickly. Ellison leaned slightly back in her chair, rereading the timeline. Subject cooperative. No prohibited materials. No behavioral resistance. No immediate threat indicators. Yet physical restraint had been authorized. She made a small note. Threshold evaluation required review. Downstairs, Officer Reynolds sat quietly in a temporary administrative workspace. Temporary reassignment did not carry public visibility, but internally it represented transition. Reflection period. Documentation period. Evaluation period. Reynolds understood procedure. He had seen similar processes applied to others before. Yet experiencing it personally felt different, because judgment always felt clearer when applied outward. Reflection felt more complicated when applied inward. Sergeant Kyle Mercer stepped into the room, briefly closing the door gently behind him. "They've requested a preliminary statement," Mercer said calmly. Reynolds nodded once. "That's expected." Mercer took a seat across from him. "You know how these reviews work." Reynolds gave a small exhale. "They examine decision thresholds." Mercer nodded. "They examine consistency. Consistency reduced unpredictability. Unpredictability created institutional risk. Risk required mitigation." Reynolds folded his hands together. "I believed I was acting appropriately." Mercer responded carefully. Belief and alignment are reviewed separately, because confidence did not automatically equal accuracy. Accuracy required measurable justification. Meanwhile, Dr. Aaliyah Carter proceeded through the remainder of the airport with the same quiet composure she had demonstrated throughout the encounter. She did not contact media. She did not share the experience publicly. Her role required observation, not publicity. Objective evaluation relied on authentic behavior patterns, not public pressure. As she waited near Gate 42, reviewing briefing materials on her tablet, her attention remained focused on the broader purpose of her assignment. Her responsibility extended beyond one encounter. She had been tasked with evaluating procedural consistency across multiple transportation hubs. Consistency created reliability. Reliability created trust. Trust supported cooperation. Nearby passengers moved through their routines, unaware that the calm woman seated near the charging station had just participated in an interaction that would influence internal training discussions. Because institutional improvement often began quietly, without headlines, without announcement. Back inside the administrative office, Compliance Director Ellison forwarded the preliminary report to the Training Review Committee. Subject cooperative. Escalation threshold review recommended. Decision proportionality analysis requested. Pattern comparison pending. Each line signaled careful evaluation. The objective was not discipline alone. The objective was correction. Correction improved reliability. Reliability improved system performance. System performance affected public confidence. Later that afternoon, Airport Command issued a brief internal communication emphasizing procedural consistency and proportional escalation standards. No names mentioned, no accusations presented, only principle reinforced. Professional communication often focused on improvement rather than embarrassment. Embarrassment rarely produced sustainable change. Clear standards did. Officer Reynolds reviewed the internal guidance message quietly. He recognized the language. He had read similar updates many times before. Yet this time the message felt personal, because reflection often deepened understanding. Understanding improved judgment. Improved judgment strengthened professionalism. Across the terminal, Dr. Aaliyah Carter prepared for boarding as the final announcement echoed through the gate area. Passengers gathered. Carry-ons adjusted. Boarding groups called. Normal travel routines resumed. Yet beneath the routine, something meaningful had occurred. A system had been tested. A response had been observed. An opportunity for improvement had emerged. As Aaliyah stepped forward with the boarding group, her role remained unchanged. Observe. Document. Evaluate. Because lasting change rarely occurred through confrontation alone. It occurred through awareness, through discipline, through commitment to fairness. And fairness consistently applied strengthened trust in systems designed to protect everyone. 3 weeks after the incident at Checkpoint B, the internal review reached its final stage. Unlike public drama, institutional accountability often moved quietly, guided by procedure rather than spectacle. Documentation had been examined carefully. Video footage had been reviewed repeatedly from multiple angles. Each decision point had been evaluated against established policy standards governing escalation thresholds and proportional response. Consistency, objectivity, clarity. These were the benchmarks used to determine whether authority had been exercised appropriately. Inside the Regional Transportation Oversight Office, Compliance Director Margaret Ellison sat across from representatives of the Training Review Committee. The atmosphere was professional, focused, disciplined. No raised voices. No emotional reactions. Only analysis. The findings had become increasingly clear as the review progressed. Dr. Aaliyah Carter had demonstrated full procedural cooperation from the moment of initial contact. She had complied with screening instructions. She had not resisted questioning. She had not displayed behavior that met the defined threshold for physical restraint. Her decision to request supervisory presence before presenting restricted federal credentials aligned with established protocol designed to prevent unauthorized exposure of sensitive identification. Officer Reynolds' decision to escalate to physical restraint had not met proportional justification standards under current training guidelines. The conclusion was precise. Discretion had been applied inconsistently. Inconsistent application of discretion created operational vulnerability. Operational vulnerability reduced institutional reliability. Institutional reliability affected public confidence. Ellison summarized the findings calmly. The review does not conclude malicious intent, she stated. The review identifies deviation from proportional response training standards. Language mattered because accountability focused on correction rather than condemnation. The Training Review Committee recommended updated emphasis on behavioral indicator calibration in annual officer development modules. Threshold interpretation required refinement. Pattern recognition training required reinforcement. Bias interruption strategies required reinforcement. Institutional improvement often emerged from uncomfortable moments. Officer Reynolds received formal notification of the review outcome during a scheduled administrative meeting. The room remained quiet as the findings were explained. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures, only clarity. "You remain a valued member of the department," the reviewing officer explained calmly. However, this incident indicates the need for recalibration of escalation threshold interpretation. Reynolds listened carefully. Professional discipline required openness to evaluation. Evaluation provided opportunity for growth. Growth strengthened competence. He accepted the recommendation for advanced decision calibration training. Training did not represent punishment. Training represented refinement. Refinement strengthened judgment. Judgment shaped future outcomes. Meanwhile, Dr. Aaliyah Carter submitted her comprehensive procedural consistency report to the Office of Transportation Risk Assessment. Her findings extended beyond one encounter. Her analysis reviewed multiple data points gathered across different airports, identifying areas where decision thresholds demonstrated variation. Variation did not automatically indicate misconduct. Variation indicated need for alignment. Alignment improved predictability. Predictability improved fairness. Fairness strengthened system legitimacy. Within her report, Aaliyah included a carefully structured observation. When discretionary authority operates without consistent calibration, risk increases not only for individual travelers, but for institutional credibility. The statement was analytical, measured, professional. Because effective reform rarely relied on accusation. It relied on clarity. Weeks later, updated guidance materials were distributed across regional training channels, emphasizing proportional response evaluation standards and reinforcing the importance of objective behavioral criteria. No individuals were named. No incidents were described in detail. Professional development rarely required public exposure. It required commitment to improvement. Officer Reynolds completed the updated training module with quiet focus. Experience had taught him that confidence required continuous adjustment. Adjustment strengthened competence. Competence strengthened professionalism. Professionalism strengthened trust. Across the country, thousands of travelers moved through airport security lines every day. Most interactions remained routine, unremarkable, efficient. Yet behind the scenes, subtle adjustments improved the fairness of decision-making processes. Improvement often remained invisible. But invisible improvement still mattered, because institutional trust developed gradually, through consistency, through fairness, through accountability. Dr. Aaliyah Carter continued her work evaluating transportation systems rarely recognized publicly, yet contributing to incremental improvements that strengthened reliability across complex operational environments. Her role did not require recognition. Her role required integrity. Integrity required discipline. Discipline required patience, because meaningful change rarely occurred instantly. It unfolded gradually, through reflection, through adaptation, through commitment to fairness applied consistently. The encounter at Checkpoint B had not been dramatic in the way public attention often measured significance, but within institutional frameworks, it had created opportunity for alignment. Alignment strengthened reliability. Reliability strengthened trust. Trust strengthened cooperation between systems and the public they served. And sometimes the quietest corrections produced the strongest foundations for lasting progress. Nearly 2 months after the encounter at Checkpoint B, the ripple effects of that single moment continued, moving quietly through layers of institutional practice. No headlines had captured the story. No viral video had dominated the news cycle. Yet meaningful change rarely required spectacle. Inside the Office of Transportation Risk Assessment, Dr. Aaliyah Carter finalized her extended report, a comprehensive evaluation built from dozens of observed interactions across multiple major airports. Each observation had been documented carefully, not to criticize individuals, but to identify patterns that influenced decision-making reliability. Patterns revealed something important. Human judgment, even when supported by training, could still be influenced by perception. Perception, when shaped by assumption rather than evidence, created inconsistency. Inconsistency created risk. Risk affected fairness. Fairness affected trust. Trust affected cooperation. And cooperation formed the foundation of effective public safety systems. Aaliyah reviewed the final section of her report, ensuring that her language remained balanced, precise, and constructive. Her objective had never been to assign personal blame. Her objective had always been systemic clarity, because strong systems were not defined by the absence of mistakes. They were defined by the willingness to learn from them. Her findings emphasized one central principle. Discretion must be guided by objective criteria. Objective criteria must be applied consistently. Consistency must remain independent of personal perception. Because fairness could not depend on appearance. Fairness could not depend on assumptions. Fairness could not depend on comfort. Fairness depended on discipline. Discipline required awareness. Awareness required humility. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Reynolds had completed the advanced decision calibration training recommended by the review committee. The training did not erase his years of experience. It refined them. Through scenario-based evaluation modules, officers were encouraged to pause briefly when assessing irregular indicators to verify whether their interpretation aligned with documented thresholds rather than subjective impressions. Training reinforced an essential truth. Authority functioned best when guided by measured judgment rather than instinct alone. Reynolds did not speak publicly about the experience. He did not attempt to defend or justify the past. Instead, he focused forward. Forward toward improvement. Forward toward greater consistency. Forward toward professionalism, strengthened through reflection. Because growth often began at the moment certainty was challenged. Several weeks later, during a routine morning shift, Reynolds observed travelers moving through the checkpoint with the same steady rhythm he had witnessed thousands of times before. Families adjusting carry-ons, business travelers reviewing messages, students navigating unfamiliar procedures. Each individual carried their own destination, their own purpose, their own story. Security, when functioning properly, remained nearly invisible. Invisible did not mean unimportant. Invisible meant reliable. Reliable meant trusted. Reynolds understood now that trust did not emerge automatically from authority alone. Trust emerged from fairness demonstrated consistently. Fairness demonstrated consistently required discipline. Discipline required awareness of bias. Awareness of bias required humility. Humility strengthened judgment. And judgment shaped every decision made in environments where authority affected real lives. Across the country, small adjustments continued, shaping improved training frameworks. Updated guidance emphasized proportional response thresholds. Refined scenario modules improved decision calibration. Subtle improvements strengthened consistency. Consistency strengthened credibility. Credibility strengthened cooperation between institutions and the communities they served. Dr. Aaliyah Carter continued her work with quiet dedication. Rarely recognized publicly, yet contributing to gradual improvements that enhanced reliability across complex transportation systems. Her work did not seek attention. Her work sought balance. because balance ensured that authority served fairness rather than undermined it. The encounter at Checkpoint B became one of many data points contributing to broader institutional refinement. One moment among many. Yet meaningful change often began with single moments. Moments where assumptions were challenged. Moments where systems were tested. Moments where accountability strengthened integrity. As travelers continued moving through airports across the nation, most remained unaware of the quiet adjustments shaping the fairness of the processes guiding their journeys. They simply experienced smoother interactions, more consistent decisions, greater confidence in systems designed to protect them, because fairness did not require recognition to have impact. Fairness required commitment. Commitment required awareness. Awareness required willingness to learn. And learning ensured that dignity remained central to every interaction regardless of appearance, background, or assumption. True professionalism did not mean never making mistakes. True professionalism meant improving when mistakes revealed opportunity for growth, because the measure of any system was not whether challenges occurred. The measure was whether those challenges strengthened the commitment to fairness for everyone. And fairness, when protected, consistently created trust strong enough to endure beyond any single moment.